The prairie was quiet just before dawn, the kind of stillness that made the skin tighten, like nature itself was holding its breath. In the dim pre-light, a warm wind rustled through the dry grass, carrying with it the scent of smoke. Faint, distant, almost out of place. Clara Whitlock stirred in her cot inside the wooden frame house her father had built with calloused hands and quiet pride. Her eyes fluttered open not because of the scent, but because something felt wrong. The silence was too complete. Then came the scream. It sliced through the morning like a blade, high and guttural. Clara bolted upright, her breath catching as another sound followed. Gunfire, muffled shouts, horses, the unmistakable thunder of hooves. Her heart surged with panic as she stumbled out of bed, pulling on boots with shaking hands. Her mother's voice called out from the hallway, taut with terror, "Clara, hide!" But it was already too late. The front door exploded inward. Her younger brother, James, only 11, ran into the room, eyes wild with fear. Clara grabbed his arm instinctively, but before they could move, the world shattered. A man appeared in the doorway, filthy and masked with a scarf. A raider. One of the many desperate souls turned to violence since the war ended and law gave way to survival. Clara didn't think. She threw a glass lamp at him, shattering it against the wall, sending flames flickering along the floorboards. The raider cursed, retreating, and in that second she grabbed James's hand and ran down the hall, past the pantry, through the back door. Outside, chaos reigned. Smoke curled into the pale morning sky. Their barn was already in flames. Her father's body lay sprawled near the well, unmoving. Clara barely had time to register it before her mother's scream pierced the air, followed by a gunshot. Then, silence. James tripped behind her. She turned to help him, but the sound of a horse's snort and a man's shout sent adrenaline coursing through her. She yanked him up, heart hammering, and they sprinted into the waist-high grass that bordered the property. But James was too small, too scared. A shot cracked behind them. He fell. Clara skidded to her knees beside him, but one look told her everything. His eyes were still open, but there was no breath. Her mind wanted to deny it, to scream, to fall beside him and never move. Again, but the boots were coming. The raiders hadn't finished. She didn't cry, not then. Not yet. Clara ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave way, until the sun was high and the screams had faded into silence. The wilderness swallowed her, miles from anything familiar. No map, no water, only the small hunting knife at her belt and the iron compass her father had insisted she carry. It was his from the war. She clutched it like a relic. The desert wasn't kind to grief. The terrain grew crueler with every step. The ground was cracked and hot beneath her soles. Cacti stood like sentinels, silent and watching. She found no trail, only scattered footprints that led nowhere. Her lips dried quickly, her skin already pinking from the heat. By nightfall, her limbs trembled. She collapsed beside a dried-up creek bed, curling into herself like a child. But sleep did not come easily. Every gust of wind became a horse's breath, every creak of branches a raider's boot. Her eyes refused to shut. The second day was worse. She found a few prickly pears and gnawed at the pulp, barely enough to keep the gnawing in her stomach at bay. Her water skin, lost in the panic, was gone. The sun was relentless. Her tongue swelled. When she stumbled upon a snake sunning itself on a rock, she startled backward and nearly fell into a ravine. Every movement became a risk, every shadow a threat. That night her dreams turned fevered. She saw her father's hands working the land, her mother's smile, James chasing lizards in the dirt, and behind it all, the echo of fire and screams. She woke with tears dried on her cheeks and blood on her lip from where she'd bitten it in her sleep. On the third day, her strength abandoned her. Her knees gave out on a patch of gravel. The compass fell from her fingers and rolled a few inches, pointing stubbornly south. She lay still. The wind danced through the mesquite branches above, and for the first time, she considered that maybe she wouldn't get back up. Maybe the desert would swallow her whole, and no one would remember the girl who once dreamed of painting mountains. But even then, something in her refused to die quietly. She rolled onto her back and opened her eyes to the sky, so vast, so impossibly blue it mocked her suffering. A bird circled overhead, black and slow, waiting. She stared up at it with grim defiance. "Not yet," she whispered. That's when the hoofbeats came. Faint at first, then louder, steady, rhythmic, not the chaos of raiders. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond. Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment, then opened again as the sound neared. She saw a blur of motion, dark hair, a silhouette against the sun, a man on horseback, silent as a shadow. He dismounted, boots crunching in the gravel. Clara wanted to speak, to scream, to run, but she could only watch. The man knelt beside her. His skin was sun-darkened, his eyes sharp as obsidian, his face unreadable. Apache. He studied her without speaking. Then he reached for a water skin and pressed it to her lips. The water was warm, but it might as well have been spring rain. She drank, coughing, then drank more. Her vision cleared a little. She noticed now the weapons on his belt, the feathers tied to his braid, the paint smudged across his brow. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, but he lifted her into his arms with a gentleness that surprised her. And then she was on the back of his horse, her head against the saddle horn, the world tilting as they moved. Clara slipped into unconsciousness again, but not from fear. It was the first time she felt safe in days. She awoke to shade and the scent of pine. The ground beneath her was soft, pine needles and earth. A fire crackled a few feet away, and a piece of cloth had been tied overhead to block the sun. She tried to sit up, but winced. Her ankle was wrapped, her forehead too. Her stomach growled. And painfully, a sound drew her gaze. The Apache sat nearby, sharpening a blade. When he noticed her awake, he rose and approached slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. He offered no words, only handed her a strip of dried meat. Clara hesitated. She took it. They sat in silence as she ate, her eyes never leaving him. He never reached for her, never threatened, never assumed closeness. His presence was large, commanding, but not aggressive. She realized he'd saved her life, and not for ransom, not for harm. After a while, he picked up her compass from a nearby rock. He examined it, then handed it to her with a quiet reverence, as though recognizing its importance. Clara took it and whispered, "Thank you." He nodded once, then returned to the fire. And though no words were spoken, something shifted. The hatred she'd been taught, the fear of the savage, didn't match the man before her. He hadn't just spared her, he'd cared for her. She didn't know why. The wind picked up, whispering through the trees, carrying away the last. Tendrils of smoke from a nightmare she had fled. Clara stared into the flames, the meat gone from her hands, the compass warm in her palm. She was no longer running, but she wasn't home either. She was somewhere between grief and something unknown, between being hunted and being protected, and deep in her chest a question began to stir, not of why he'd helped her, but who he truly was, and what that would mean for her now. The days that followed passed not in hours, but in moments, sharp and disjointed, like fragments of a broken mirror. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, her dreams tangled with the past and present. When she woke fully, it was to the muted light of morning and the soft murmur of water nearby. Her body ached, her lips cracked, but the searing panic was gone, replaced by a strange, uneasy calm. The Apache man, her rescuer, was not far. He knelt by a stream, rinsing a strip of cloth darkened with old blood. His movements were methodical, neither hurried nor lazy, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. He glanced at her once, briefly, then returned to his work. Clara watched him silently, unsure if she was meant to speak. When she shifted, a groan escaped her throat, and he was beside her instantly, offering a water skin. She took it with both hands, gulping greedily. The water tasted of stone and earth, but it soothed the fire in her throat. She coughed, then met his gaze. His expression was unreadable, the lines of his face weathered and still. There was no malice in him, no cruelty, but there was something else, something grounded and immovable. "You saved me," she said softly, unsure if he would understand. He said nothing, only nodded. "Why?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. His silence was not dismissive. It was measured, almost thoughtful, as if he was waiting to decide whether she was worth the words. Then, without ceremony, he turned and began to pack a small bundle with roots and herbs. Clara watched, noting the way he worked with instinctive ease. Whoever he was, he belonged to this land in a way she never had. She'd always felt like an intruder on her father's land, planting fences where the wild still roamed, carving out a home in soil that did not want taming. But this man didn't tame the land. He moved with it. He returned to her side and gently peeled back the wrapping on her ankle. She winced. The skin was bruised and tender, but the swelling had lessened. He dabbed the herbs onto it with surprising care, then rewrapped it tightly. Not a word passed between them, but a flicker of understanding began to form. As the sun rose higher, the man gestured for her to eat. He offered her more dried meat, a handful of mesquite beans, and a small cup of something bitter that made her shiver but dulled the pain. They sat in the shade, facing each other, but never quite meeting eyes. She wanted to ask his name, to understand more, but the silence seemed sacred, and she didn't dare break it. That night thunder rolled across the sky, clouds gathered like soldiers. A storm loomed on the horizon, a monsoon sweeping in from the south. The man moved swiftly, securing their camp, tying down supplies, reinforcing the overhead tarp. Clara struggled to rise, but her leg throbbed with every movement. He returned and looked at her, then pointed toward a narrow crevice in the cliff wall. She understood. Shelter. He helped her up, his arms strong around her waist, and half-carried her to the narrow overhang. As the first drops began to fall, they huddled beneath the rock, the world around them turning to grey and motion. Rain came in sheets, cold and merciless, hammering the earth. The man sat beside her, unmoving, eyes watching the storm. Lightning flashed, and for a moment Clara saw the edges of his face illuminated, scars near the jaw, a faint tattoo above the collarbone, the weight of unspoken years behind his eyes. "Who are you?" she asked again, softer this time. Still. No answer, but he reached into his satchel and pulled out a small totem, shaped like a bird in flight, carved from bone. He placed it gently in her hand and let her hold it. It was smooth from age, warm from his touch. She ran her thumb over it, unsure what it meant, but certain it meant something. When the storm passed, they emerged into a cleansed world. The air smelled of wet sage and fresh soil. Clara took deeper breaths. Her mind was clearing. The pain still lingered, but her spirit, once fractured, was beginning to mend. They moved slowly through the hills over the next few days, traveling at a careful pace to accommodate her injury. The man, still nameless, kept a vigilant eye on the horizon. He taught her without words when to duck beneath brush, how to listen for the chirr of cicadas that warned of heat, what plants were safe to chew. He made gestures, patient and calm, and she mirrored them, learning in silence. One morning, as they passed a grove of cottonwoods, he stopped and pointed to a track in the dirt. A deer had passed recently. He touched the print with 2 fingers, then pressed them to her chest. "Listen." That was what she heard in the gesture, even if no words were spoken. That evening, while she gathered firewood, hobbling more steadily now, she found herself humming. An old tune, something her mother used to sing while kneading bread. She hadn't meant to hum it, but it slipped out. The man looked up. He listened, and for the first time, his expression changed. His eyes softened. He didn't smile, but something gentler passed over his features, like the shadow of a memory. Later, as they sat by the fire, he took out a piece of charcoal and scratched something onto a flat stone. A symbol, a name perhaps. Then he pointed to himself. "Takoda," he said. Clara repeated it slowly. "Takoda." He nodded. Then he pointed at her. "Clara," she offered. He repeated it once, then again, shaping it with care. It sounded different. In his mouth. Softer. It was the beginning of something. That night her dreams were quieter. Not empty, never that, but quieter. Her family's faces were still there, but not screaming, just watching, as if waiting to see who she would become. Next, over the following days, Clara grew stronger. Her limp remained, but she moved with more confidence. She helped gather food, peeled roots, carried water. She caught Takoda watching her once, not with suspicion, but with something akin to curiosity. As if she were more than a burden now, as if she were becoming part of something. One morning, she found her compass sitting beside her blanket, cleaned and polished. She looked up, and Takoda was standing a few feet away, arms crossed, waiting. She clutched the compass to her chest. "Thank you," she said again. This time he responded. His voice was low, rough from disuse, but steady. "You keep walking," she blinked. He had spoken, and the words, simple as they were, struck something deep inside her. She wanted to ask what he meant, but instinct told her not to. Some truths were better left open-ended. They shared a rabbit that night, roasted over open flame. The meat was tough, but they ate in comfortable quiet. Clara found herself watching the stars, tracing constellations with her finger. Takoda watched her, silent. After a long while, he spoke again. This time the words came slower. "Bad men still follow," he said. "I saw signs." Clara felt her stomach tighten. She didn't need to ask who. The raiders, the men who burned her home, who killed her family, they were still out there. She had known it in her bones, but hearing it aloud made the air feel thinner. "Then we keep moving," she said. Takoda looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. They packed the next morning before the sun rose, heading deeper into the highlands. The terrain grew steeper, but Clara kept pace. Every step hurt, but she didn't complain. They reached a plateau by late afternoon. The valley below stretched wide and empty, dotted with shadows. Takoda scanned the distance with practiced eyes. Then he spoke again, only 2 words. "We stay." It wasn't a question. He began preparing a more permanent camp, setting traps, marking boundaries, collecting stones. Clara helped where she could, her movements clumsy but determined. By nightfall, they had a fire burning within a ring of rocks and a lean-to built between 2 trees. As they sat by the fire, Clara turned to him. "Why help me?" Takoda didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames, then into the darkness beyond. Finally, he reached into the pouch around his neck and withdrew another carving, a smaller one this time, worn almost smooth. He handed it to her. It was a horse, etched with care. She looked at him, waiting. "My daughter," he said softly. "Lost her. Long ago." Clara clutched the carving, breath catching in her throat. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was shared. That night, she lay beneath a sky so thick with stars, it felt like the heavens had split. Open, she didn't sleep quickly. Her thoughts drifted from faces lost to faces newly found. She did not yet know what would come next, if safety lay ahead or only more peril. But for the first time since the fire, she did not feel alone. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet voice whispered that perhaps she was no longer just surviving. She was beginning again. The morning sun crept slowly over the jagged ridges, casting long shadows across the highlands. Clara stirred awake, her blanket stiff with morning dew. She sat up slowly, her body sore from the hard ground, but her mind clearer than it had been in weeks. Takoda was already gone, his presence marked only by a pair of tracks in the damp. Soil and the faint smell of cooked beans lingering in the air. She didn't panic, not anymore. He always came back. Clara rose carefully, testing the strength in her leg. The pain had dulled, replaced by a deep ache she had learned to live with. She gathered wood from the edge of the camp, her movements slow but steady. The rhythm of survival had settled into her bones. She had changed, though the mirror she once used to know herself was long gone. When Takoda returned, he carried a rabbit slung over his shoulder and a cautious look in his eyes. He set the animal down, then pulled something from his satchel, a leather pouch, small and worn. He handed it to her. She opened it and frowned. Inside was a set of beads, faded and uneven, strung together with sinew. "For you," he said. Clara turned them over in her hands. "What are they for?" He motioned to her wrist. "Protection," he said, "for when the winds turn." She tied the beads carefully, feeling the weight of them press lightly against her skin. She didn't believe in magic or omens, but she believed in Takoda. And that meant something more than belief. It meant trust. Later, as they sat by the fire, he finally spoke the words she'd been dreading. "They come closer, the men who burned your home." Clara's chest tightened. "How many?" "4, maybe 5. They track poorly, but not always." The fear came rushing back like a cold wind down her spine. She thought she'd put that terror behind her, but it had only been waiting. Quiet, patient. She looked at Takoda, expecting him to say more, to offer comfort or reassurance. But he only watched the fire. "We could run," she said. He shook his head. "They don't stop, like wolves who tasted blood." The silence between them stretched long and hard. She wanted to scream, to curse the sky, to demand why this nightmare wouldn't end, but none of it would help. So instead she asked, "What do we do?" Takoda's eyes narrowed slightly. "We make them afraid." That night they made preparations. Clara helped set traps, snares rigged between trees, pits lined with sharpened stakes. Takoda showed her how to lay false trails, how to disguise the scent of a campfire, how to spot the glint of a rifle barrel through the underbrush. Clara listened, absorbed, obeyed. Her fear became fuel. The woman who once stitched dresses by candlelight now wrapped flint in cloth and tied knots with. Shaking hands, they waited. 2 days passed, then a third. On the 4th morning, a shot rang out. The echo bounced off the canyon walls like thunder. Clara dropped to the earth instinctively, heart pounding, her hands trembling. Takoda crouched beside her, motionless. "Trap," he whispered. First one fell. From their vantage, they saw movement. 3 men now, moving cautiously. One was injured, limping heavily. Takoda's traps had drawn blood. "Still 2 more," he muttered. Clara studied them through the gap in the rocks. They looked nothing like men. They were shadows wrapped in rage and greed, their clothes torn, faces hidden beneath bandanas. But she recognized something in the way they moved, like hyenas circling prey. "They're close," she said. Takoda nodded. "They'll come at night." And they did. The moon hung low, its light too weak to illuminate the ground. Clara lay beneath a thick covering of brush, Takoda nearby, both silent and still. The first man stepped into the camp's false clearing, a ring of stones with a still burning fire, baited with supplies meant to lure. He took 2 steps, then stumbled. The ground beneath him caved. He screamed. Then the second man appeared, firing blindly into the darkness. Takoda moved like wind, silent, fast, absolute. He tackled the man from behind, and Clara heard the struggle, the impact of bone against earth, a grunt of pain. Then Silence. When it was over, two men lay still, one groaning, the other unmoving. Clara crawled toward the fire. Her breath came fast and shallow, but it wasn't over. A shot cracked from the trees. Takoda staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. "No!" Clara screamed, crawling to him. He waved her off, still gripping his knife, eyes scanning the shadows. Clara grabbed his rifle, fumbling with the unfamiliar weight. Another shot rang out. Bark splintered above her. She spotted the muzzle flash. Behind, the large pine. Without thinking, she steadied the rifle on her knee, aimed and pulled the trigger. The kick nearly knocked her back, but the shot found its mark. Silence followed. She couldn't move. Her arms were locked, her lungs burning. Takoda grunted, crawling to sit up. "You shot true," Clara blinked, hands shaking. I just... He smiled faintly, the first time she'd seen him truly smile. Warrior's heart. They rested, only briefly. The danger was not fully past. The last of the raiders could return, or worse. Others might come in their place. But that night, beside the fire, Clara did not sleep. She sat beside Takoda, tending to his wound. He did not complain, though sweat glistened on his brow. "You should have let me take the shot," he said quietly. "You were bleeding." He chuckled once, then grimaced. "Still am." They sat in silence for a while. Then softly Clara asked, "Your daughter, what happened?" Takoda's jaw tightened. He stared into the flames. "White men came, took from our camp, said we'd stolen cattle. She was 10, didn't speak their tongue. They called her savage. She ran. They shot her in the back." Clara felt her chest collapse inward. The pain in his voice was not loud. It was quiet, like a scream buried in sand. It left. No room for comfort, only acknowledgement. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Takoda did not look at her, but he nodded once. "I see her in dreams," he said. "But they don't bring peace." They watched the fire burn low, the logs turning to coals. Clara stared at the night sky. "I used to think I'd marry some boy from town," she said. "Wear lace, have 4 children, bake pies. Now, I think I'll learn to shoot straighter." Takoda laughed, more of a breath than a sound. "Good plan." Morning broke over the ridgeline. Clara stood, her eyes fixed on the trail. Below, smoke curled faintly in the distance. Perhaps another settlement, perhaps not, but something in her knew they couldn't stay here. She turned to Takoda. "We should move, head south." He looked at her, then nodded. "Yes, to the Red Cliffs. My people still live there. Will they accept me?" He considered the question. "You walk strong now. You are not weak. They will see." Clara stared into the distance, fingers curling around the leather beads on her wrist. She didn't know what lay ahead. She had lost everything and built something fragile in its place. Not a home, not yet, but a foundation. She turned back to Takoda, the man who had once been her rescuer and was now something far more complex. "We leave at first light," she said. He nodded again, and so together they began to pack. A settler woman and an Apache warrior, bound by scars, survival, and something slowly growing between them, something unspoken, not yet love, but perhaps the start of it. The winds had turned, and Clara walked into them unafraid. Dust rose behind them as they crossed the mesa, the wind singing low through the canyons. The land opened wide to the south. Red stone rising in monuments, scorched earth folding in layers of silence and history. They'd been walking for days, each step taking them further from the ashes of Clara's old life, deeper into Takoda's world. The wound on his shoulder had festered in the heat, though he never complained. Clara made poultices with bark and herbs he taught her to find, cleaned the gash twice a day. Still, she noticed his breath came shorter now, his sleep more restless. He was slowing. They camped that night in a hollow behind a natural wall of stone. A fire burned low, casting amber light across his weathered face. Clara sat beside him, the silence heavy between them, not from discomfort, but from the weight of understanding. "You're not well," she said. Takoda didn't respond at first. He stared into the flames as if they held some answer neither of them could reach. "It will pass," he said finally. "I've had worse." She reached for his hand. His fingers were calloused, worn from years of war and wilderness. She didn't believe him, but she didn't say so. He looked at her then, something raw and distant flickering in his eyes. "My people believe that when a warrior is close to death, he begins to see the spirits. Last night I saw her again. My daughter." Clara's throat tightened. "What did she say?" Takoda looked away. "She said nothing, just watched me." They spoke no more that night. The stars turned above them, wheeling silently through the velvet black. In the morning, Clara awoke to hoofbeats. She rose, heart racing, and saw them. Riders on the ridge. 5, maybe 6, moving fast. "Raiders!" she hissed. Takoda was already on his feet, swaying slightly but alert. "Not the same men," he said. "New wolves." Clara grabbed the rifle. Her hands no longer trembled as they once did. The feel of the weapon was familiar now, an extension of her will. "We can't outrun them," she said. "No," Takoda agreed, "but we can outsmart them." He pointed to the rocks above their camp. "There's a narrow path, leads to a dead end. We'll draw them in. Then we fight." Clara nodded, no hesitation. She was no longer the girl hiding under floorboards. She was forged in fire now. They climbed quickly, weaving between crags and thornbrush. At the top, a basin opened, high walls, only one way in or out. A trap. Takoda positioned himself on one side, Clara on the other. They hid behind the rocks, waiting. The first rider entered, cautious, rifle raised. Then the second, third. Clara counted 6. All hardened men, eyes sharp, mouths grim. Takoda waited until the last had entered. Then he whistled, sharp and piercing. The men froze. For one breathless second the canyon held its breath. Then all hell broke loose. Takoda threw the burst spear. It hit home, piercing a rider's side. Clara fired next, her shot dropping a second man. The raiders shouted, ducking for cover, returning fire wildly. Bullets ricocheted off stone, sparks dancing in the air. Clara reloaded, sweat pouring down her brow. Another shot, another fell. Takoda moved like smoke, silent and fast, slashing with his knife when the bullets ran out. Clara fought her own battle, ducking, shooting, flanking. The fourth man charged her with a blade. She didn't think, she just reacted. Raised the rifle, too slow. Takoda tackled the man mid-sprint, both crashing to the ground. The blade slashed across Takoda's back. Clara screamed, aimed, and fired. The attacker dropped instantly. Only one remained. He tried to flee, galloping, out of the canyon. Clara picked up the fallen man's revolver, steadied it, and fired. The rider slumped forward, his horse continuing on, riderless. Silence fell. The canyon stank of blood and gunpowder. Clara stumbled toward Takoda. He was on his knees, breathing hard, blood staining his shirt. "No, no, no," she whispered, dropping beside him. He looked up, his face pale, mouth drawn in a tight line. "Did we win?" She smiled through her tears. "We did." He chuckled, weakly, then coughed. "Good." She helped him lie back, pressing cloth to the wound. "You're not dying. I won't let you." He gripped her wrist, his eyes locking with hers. "If I do, you keep walking." "Takoda, no. Listen, you are strong now. You know the land. You know yourself." She bit her lip, choking. On emotion. "Don't do this." "I see her again," he whispered, voice fading. "She smiles this time." His hand fell from her wrist. Clara leaned over him, her breath ragged. "Takoda, please." But he was still. The canyon was silent once more, the wind brushing through the rocks like a morning song. Hours passed before she moved. She buried. him at the edge of the cliff, where the sun touched the stone first each morning. She marked his grave with his spear and scattered wild sage around it. Then she sat for a long time, staring into the horizon, the rifle across her lap, the bracelet of beads still tied around her wrist. When the sun began to set, she stood. Clara walked out of the canyon with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge Takoda had given her. She followed the path he'd told her about, south to the red cliffs where his people might still wait. Each night she built a fire. Each morning she rose with the sun. She began to sing softly, fragments of songs she remembered, tunes her mother once hummed. They weren't songs of joy, but of endurance. Weeks later, she reached the edge of the cliffs, smoke curled gently from a distant camp. She approached slowly, cautiously, every instinct on edge. The people there watched her with wary eyes, dark faces, braided hair, quiet strength. She said nothing, only held up the beaded bracelet on her wrist. An old woman stepped forward. Her eyes studied Clara's face, then the beads. "Takoda's?" she asked. Clara nodded. The woman said nothing for a long time. Then she took Clara's hand and led her into the circle. Time passed. Clara did not stay an outsider for long. She helped with the fires, learned their language, told stories in the evenings. She spoke of Takoda rarely, but when she did, the others listened with quiet reverence. One day a child brought her a carving, an eagle in flight. "For you," he said shyly. She took it smiling. "Thank you." She sat on a flat stone outside the lodge, the carving in her lap. The sky was wide, unending, the cliffs glowing with the fire of sunset. She had not chosen this life. It had been thrust upon her, but it had become hers. Her pain had not vanished. Her grief still whispered in the wind, but now it shared space with something else, strength. Clara rose and walked to the edge of the cliff. The land stretched far and wide, untouched and wild. She felt him there, in the rustle of grass, the cry of hawks above. She was not afraid, not anymore. And somewhere far below, beyond the dust and the blood and the pain, the wind carried her name in a language she had learned to understand, not with her ears, but with her soul. Clara, the warrior bride of the frontier.